like to start by welcoming you all to our first Earth Day event, 2021. Um, I'm Susanna Calvert. I'm the founder and convener for the Foundation for Family and Community Healing. And I'm also leading the Earth Ministry at the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Richmond. And this program is being offered in partnership with the two organizations. Speaking from the perspective of the Foundation for Family and Community Healing, our mission is to help everyone learn to create healthy and rewarding relationships with ourselves, each other, and Earth, and the loving force that connects us all. And our Earth mission is super important to us. We believe that one of the reasons that climate change has not made more progress, despite a lot of time and effort and money, is because part of the problem is that it is a relationship issue. And that we as humanity have largely forgotten that we are in a reciprocal relationship with Earth that is not just physical, but also psychological, emotional, and spiritual. And that when we heal our relationship and return to a caring, reciprocal relationship with Earth, that we all can start to create a more holistic solution to climate change, and also find holistic solutions to support Earth healing. I want to talk about that just a little bit more, and then I'll tell you what the program is and how we're going to be going forward with it. And then I'll introduce the main event, with our first speaker. But I wanted to talk more about our reciprocal relationship with Earth, because not everybody knows what I mean by that, and being in a psychological, emotional, and spiritual relationship. So the analogy I like to use is that if we have a loved one who is ailing, that of course we would provide physical and medical care or nutritional care to that loved one, but we would also want to support them psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually, so that they may bring all of their resources to healing. So what we're asking people to do in the foundation is to think of Earth as that loved one, and what would you do if that loved one was ailing? Well, you would want to rush to be by their side, and you'd put your cell phone away and give them your undivided attention. You'd be present. You might talk about how beautiful they are, or brush her hair, or give her a little manicure. You would notice how she's doing from day to day. You would tell her what you appreciate about her, how she's been important in your life, and how thankful you are for having her in your life. You might entertain her and sing her a song, or read a poem to her, and you might pray or meditate for her healing. So these are the kinds of things that we're asking people to consider doing, spending quality time, increasing the quality of their time with Earth, and maybe even the quantity. But this is something that doesn't necessarily have to take a whole lot more time, and doesn't have to cost any money at all. So we feel it's a solution that everyone can access and participate in. And we know from environmental psychology, it's good for us, and we believe it's good for Earth. And it certainly falls into the category of couldn't hurt. So we are practicing what we preach individually and as a community, and are also bringing this broader perspective of holistic care to Earth with programs like this. And today we're talking about eco grief and healing. And we wanted to put this program together because eco grief and eco anxiety are so real for so many of us. And we believe not just us, but also for Earth, that there is a grief process going on there, and that we can heal as a community together and with Earth as well. So I'm very proud of our program today. I think we have a very unique lineup. We're going to be exploring this idea of grief and healing with Earth, starting with this scientific perspective. And our first speaker will be Jan Morasky. And also from the point of view of deep psychology and our collective unconscious with Sarah Norton. And also the philosophy around death and dying from a religious and spiritual perspective, and also the clinical psychology of healing, and also a spiritual approach to healing with Earth with Faith Grieger. And so Tim Ford and Karen Gill are also going to be are also two of our presenters. So what we are going to, so I hope you will see that this program is very unique, and I think is very uniquely in our foundation wheelhouse. And I hope you will continue to join us in our other programs and events, which I'll talk about more at the end. We have education and social media, and I hope you join us. But I'd like to transition now to the program. You can see the agenda here. We will have 2 speakers, and then we will take a 5-minute break. And I will invite you to put your questions into the chat, and we will attend to them throughout the program. And we will leave some time at the end if there's any additional questions to be addressed. So please put your questions in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. And with that, I'd like to switch over and introduce our first speaker. So Jan Morasky is a physicist, author, and former physics professor with 24 years experience teaching physics and developing courses. She's currently a metaphysical practitioner with Inspired Ascension Ministries, specializing in life transformational mentoring based on the science of human design. She is also working towards a doctorate of metaphysics degree. The title of her talk is Gaia and Humanity, the Quantum and Electromagnetic Connection.
Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today and part of this program. And what I'm going to be talking with you about is the basically what science tells us about the consciousness of our dear, lovely planet Earth. So what I hope that you take away from this talk is threefold. Number 1, Earth is conscious. Number 2, Earth is a self-regulating organism. And 3, Earth communicates with humanity. So let's begin with quantum physics. We'll just start out with the easy stuff right now. All right, so as a physicist, this is definitely something that I've always loved about physics, is that it seems to answer some of the questions that I have always had about the connection between science and spirituality. More specifically, quantum physics. And now I know that might make people's eyeballs roll up in their head, but I promise I won't get too much in the weeds. But what I want to explain about quantum physics is that quantum physics, it might be surprising to know that it is the most experimentally proven field of all of physics. Even though it's the most recent field of all of physics, just about 100 years old, there's been more experimental evidence in quantum physics than in any other field, including Newtonian mechanics, which is kind of like your basic motion and that sort of thing. But anyway, one of the interesting things about quantum physics, what I want to pull out here, is the idea that even from the very beginning of quantum physics exploration and experimentation, it was found out by physicists that even just doing the experiment can sometimes affect the results. In other words, whenever physicists would get their consciousness involved by either looking at the results or reading the results or watching what was happening, what they found was that it actually changed the results. Okay, now that is not something that normally happens in science. So let me explain a little bit with one particular experiment that might help to shed some light on that. So again, without getting too much in the weeds, I just want to explain what is called the double slit experiment. So a double slit is kind of what it sounds like. There is a barrier or a wall of some kind, and there are two narrow slits that are formed in the barrier so that some electrons can be fired between these slits. Now I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. So at first, you might think that, all right, well, how exciting is this going to be? I'm going to take some electrons, I'm going to fire them through these two slits, and then what? I'm going to get electrons hitting this screen on the back of the slits. Like, how exciting is that? Well, that isn't very exciting, but that's not what happened. So what actually happened was, even though they were firing individual electrons through these slits, what they found was that there was this pattern on the screen. It wasn't just two slits and, well, there's the electrons there, but rather there was this whole pattern of interference, and it was really quite astounding. And this pattern is very similar to the pattern that you would normally see if you were looking at maybe the surface of a pond, and maybe you took, maybe you saw some ripples across that surface that are just kind of interfering with each other. And you'll notice that in some parts, the waves are a little bit higher. In some parts, there might be cancellation. But anyway, there's a certain pattern. And this was completely unexpected. But it gets even weirder than that, okay? It's not about the pattern. But what happened was, when the physicists thought, okay, well, let's see what's going on with this pattern. How's this pattern forming? Well, they decided to take a look and say, okay, well, let me see. I'm going to watch this particular electron going through this particular slit, and I'm going to watch where that one hits. And then I'm going to watch where the next one hits. And I'm going to take this step by step and see, how is it making this pattern? And the interesting thing to me is that whenever the physicist actually looked to see, okay, which slit is this electron coming from, the pattern completely changed. So instead of seeing this pattern, this interference pattern like ripples on a pond, now the very act of the physicist watching which slit the electron went through and then watch where it hit on the screen actually made the pattern collapse. So instead of having a pattern, what they saw was exactly what you would expect in the beginning, where you would just see two collections, if you will, of electrons on the screen directly behind these slits. Okay, so what's going on with this? What they found out was that the mere act of observing and watching was injecting consciousness into the experiment, and that was actually changing the results of the experiment. This really befuddled physicists for a long time, and still does befuddle some scientists and some physicists. Although most of us are now starting to realize that consciousness is really part of nature, and that the physics is telling us that. Now, some physicists won't necessarily jump to that conclusion yet. But what is generally accepted is that information of any kind is basically an organized pattern of energy. In other words, information is a form of energy. So if you think about any kind of information, whether you're talking or you're thinking, or even physical information, like the structure of a picture or a painting or just anything, really, it goes on and on and on. All of these things, whether they are thoughts or whether they are physical structures, they have structure to them. There is an order to that, even though sometimes we might say, well, my thoughts aren't very orderly, but there is an entire organization that goes on in the mind to have that thought happen. So what Max Planck said. Max Planck, if you're not familiar, he's the father of quantum mechanics, of quantum physics, and did a lot. He basically did a lot for laying the foundation for quantum mechanics, along with many other famous physicists like Albert Einstein and others. But what Max Planck actually said was this: all matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force. We must assume behind this force is the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter. So Max Planck, the father of quantum physics, just was right out with it. And basically what this means is that anything that has order and structure is only ordered and structured because of consciousness that allowed that structure to occur in the first place and to organize that energy. So if we go back to the very smallest or tiniest particles, we look at the atom, the smallest particles that actually are stable, I should say. There are smaller ones that are not stable and they're fleeting. But if we look at the structure of the atom or molecules for that matter, these are very, very structured. There are very specific rules in place that cannot be broken. And I'll spare you all those rules, but there's a very set structure and set order and set energies within the electron makeup within the atoms. And because atoms and molecules make up everything that has matter, then anything that is matter, anything made of atoms and molecules is going to be made of consciousness as well, and have consciousness and be conscious. So that means that the planet that we live on, Earth itself, is conscious. So then we go to the second point, that Earth is a self-regulating organism. So we go to the Gaia Principle for this one. And back in the 1970s, James Lovelock and some others developed this principle, this Gaia hypothesis. And this hypothesis is really has become the accepted way of understanding ecology on a global scale. And what the Gaia hypothesis does is it takes a very holistic view of the entire Earth and all the life forms that are on and living in, on, and around the planet. And it says that all of these organisms and the planet itself are working together, and each changes the other by interaction. And so these interactions that all the organisms on Earth have are making changes in the chemistry, in the physical structure of the planet. And there's certain processes, these planetary processes, that are basically governed and facilitated by various life forms. And this not even just a coexistence, but this synergy, this necessary relationship of Earth and the constituent life forms is really a matter of leading to stability and the ability to regulate some of the systems on the planet. So one example, I'll just bring out, there's many, many, many examples, but just to give you a sense of what I'm talking about here. There's a 2008 article called The Gaia Hypothesis by P.J. Boston in Encyclopedia of Ecology. And in that article, it's a great article, but just one thing that I want to bring out from that article is, for example, in 1998, this hypothesis, the Gaia hypothesis, was successfully used correctly to make correct predictions, such as, and I quote, marine organisms would make volatile compounds that can transfer essential elements from the ocean to the land. So we see that, and again, this is just one of many, many examples of this, where we see that there's organisms that are throughout, by just living their life and going through their own life processes, they are taking in materials from the earth. They are also expending materials and also changing things chemically and biologically through the interaction with the earth as these organisms are going about their life. And it basically is telling us that these life processes change the physical environment, which is our planet Earth. It changes the actual planet. And this change allows for the continued maintenance of life on this planet, and it's very necessary. So it's a very synergistic relationship that we have, not just us, but all living life on this planet. And so the third point that I want to make is that not only is our Earth conscious and it's self-regulating as an organism in its own right, but also the Earth is communicating with humans and other life forms through energy fields. And so I want to talk specifically about the magnetic fields that we have on this planet, and how the magnetic field of the Earth, through what is called the Schumann Resonance or Schumann frequency, actually conveys information to us that supports our health and our well-being. So the Schumann resonance is often called Gaia's heartbeat because it is really, it's this pulsating magnetic field. I mean, all of us are familiar that the Earth has a magnetic field around it, but perhaps you didn't realize it was pulsating in a very orderly and structured way. And remember, anytime there's order and structure, it requires consciousness. So actually, the Earth's magnetic field extends far, far, far out into space. Like, it's much, much larger than many of the pictures that typically you see in a typical textbook or in any kind of news articles. But it really does extend all throughout, far throughout our solar system. It's much further reaching than what most of us realize. But through many, many different Earth processes, many, many complicated ones, this magnetic field actually vibrates and it pulsates, very similar to like a bowl full of jelly, okay, or like a Jello bowl. So as this frequency of the planet, of this magnetic field is pulsating, it pulsates, and this is measured all around the world in seismology labs where they measure for earthquake activity and the such. They've measured this Schumann frequency to be about 7.8 hertz, which means that it vibrates 7.8 times every second. So what we found is that this Schumann resonance, this fluctuating magnetic field of the Earth, actually conveys information to us that is life supporting. And one of the things that we notice is that the concept of entrainment, which means that whenever there is a wave of a certain frequency and there is life forms that are in that field, those life forms are going to be affected by that frequency, that pulse that's being put out. And we call that entrainment. And so what happens is the frequencies begin to match. So the source frequency that's being exerted by the Earth, then our own brains will start to adjust to that frequency. And in fact, you may know from experience that if you spend some time in nature, about maybe 20 minutes or so, you notice that you feel much more calm, you feel relaxed, you feel grounded, you feel creative and content. And this frequency actually matches very well with our alpha brainwave state, which is in the range of about 7 to 9 hertz. So 7.8 hertz, which is what the Earth is giving to us, is right in our alpha wave frequency, which means that whenever we entrain with Earth's waves, we actually begin to kind of just naturally fall into this really relaxed brain state that just opens us up for, it's expansive, and it's not, it doesn't shrink our energy, but it allows us to relax and expand and to take part in life. And so we also have these unnatural magnetic fields that are being emitted from our devices, from Wi-Fi, the power grid, and a lot of other sources. And what these do is they actually overpower the subtle communication that Earth is giving us through the Schumann resonance. And so we can lose that entrainment with the Earth frequency if we're on our devices and we're in Wi-Fi and we're inside too much and we're not getting out into Earth's healing waves. And so the Schumann frequency carries specific coded information, and scientists don't fully understand everything yet about that. And there is a lot of ongoing research into specific effects of Earth's energy fields on human health and well-being, such as hormone regulation, heart rate, and blood pressure, among many other things. So as more research is being conducted, we are learning more and more about the life-supporting informational highway between the conscious Earth and humanity. But we don't have to wait for scientific evidence to connect us with Earth consciousness. And today's program will help you do just that. So I'd like to introduce the next speaker. Up next, Sarah Norton is an independent scholar and depth psychologist with an emphasis in Jungian and archetypal psychologies. She defended her dissertation 1 year ago on Earth Day. As a convener for FFCH, she is working on modules focused on cultivating relationships with the unconscious and the Earth through dreams, myth, and image.
Thank you, Jan. That was wonderful. One of the interesting things about my field is that it started right around the same time as quantum physics. So there's a lot of sort of overlap in academia with what Jan was just talking about. So in my field of depth psychology, also called the psychology of the unconscious, and particularly in the area of archetypal psychology, there's an understanding that all aspects of the psyche are enlivened and connected to an archetypal energy. Not for a moment dare we succumb to the illusion that an archetype can be finally explained and disposed of. The most we can do is dream the myth onward and give it modern dress. This explanation is one of many that analytical psychologist Carl Gustav Jung used to define archetypes throughout his writing. From a Jungian perspective, archetypes are universal patterns which can be recognized in an image form in nature, myth, dreams, and many other mediums. Jung also wrote that archetypes are like riverbeds, which dry up when the water deserts them, but which it can find again at any time. Given this definition, we understand that archetypes are largely unknown to us. We can meet and recognize the archetype in its symbolic form as an image, just as we can recognize a dry riverbed. But this archetypal energy flows constantly, ever changing. Recognizing this archetypal energy is a psychological move termed seeing through by James Hillman, the father of archetypal psychology. To see through is to view psychologically, with soul in mind. Through the lens of archetypal psychology, soul is always present. We live in a world ensouled, a world of and with soul. In Hillman's work, we see a trend back to polytheism and an animistic sensibility from the Latin anima, meaning soul, life. By using this psychological sensibility, using this soul view to encounter the earth, one can connect more deeply to the world herself, to Gaia and all her elements. I would like to narrow in on an image from my own experience, that of ice. In my experience of the archetypal, the image of ice is the one that carved out the deepest riverbed in my psyche. It called to me at a time when I needed it the most, and perhaps at a time that it needs us the most. The ice has been telling us for decades that the world is warming. Scientists have report after report that show that our climate from this point will never be the same. That information has largely come from ice cores, which contain the history of the planet's atmosphere. The sciences show us that ice, something we often dismiss or consider inanimate, has a life cycle of its own. Though this cycle may be much longer than we can imagine, it does at some point experience a birth. It can give birth through the calving of icebergs, and it eventually experiences a death. It lives in the world. In time-lapse video, you can even see ice move, appear to breathe, and understand how it reacts to the changing environment around it. I have come to know that the ice is alive, and I hope that through the following you will see that for yourself. If we can see that the ice is alive, then perhaps we can see through to the living earth herself. If we begin to take this into account, then how we treat the world in which we live may change. Our work on her surface may need revisiting, and the way we advocate for her well-being may need to shift. A number of years ago, I had the opportunity to visit Iceland. While there, I got to go on a glacier hike in southern Iceland. This was the grand adventure, right in the middle of a 3-day bus tour. We pulled up to a newly laid gravel parking lot, got out of the van, and began heading towards a ridge in the distance. We had been gifted only a foggy glimpse of the vast glacier from the road quite a ways out. From that distance, the glacier looked like a small patch of silvery white, barely distinguishable from the distant misty air. As we breached the ridge, we saw it, laid out before us, with a vast lake underneath. Where we stood now, on a dry, gravel-strewn path, was where the sides of the glacier used to flow only years before. As we walked forward, we passed markers stating where the glacier had been from year to year. It was shrinking noticeably. As I glanced ahead, I wondered how long until where we are hiking today will be washed into the melt below. The closer we got, the more the true face of this giant body of ice came into view. What I had imagined to be pristine white was a variety of colors. In many places, it looked almost zebra-striped, black lines cutting through the white ice. But the closer you got, the more iridescent it became. There were shades of blue, aqua, gray, even some red. What was once mostly white was now pockmarked and riddled with sun-catching color. As we continued our hike higher and higher, I couldn't help but feel the paradox of this place. The ice that seemed so solid under my feet was already gone. In just a few years' time, all that would be left of this summit would be a yellow marker on the side of a vast valley. It was hard to take in, to enjoy the beauty of this place, but grieve its inevitable loss at the same time. When we reached a ridge just shy of the top, our guide gathered us to him. He knelt and began to take a small core sample from the glacier. This ice is so old that even going down just a few feet into the surface can give us a record of the atmosphere from the present back a few thousand years. He drilled down, and as the core rose up, we each took a piece. I was one of the last to receive my cold wafer, and as I grasped it in my fingers, our guide, as an example to us, placed his piece in his mouth. Kneeling in front of him, with my ragtag group of world-weary tourists, I did the same. The taste was crisp and cold, as one would expect. The freshest water from a millennia ago wet my palate. As the wafer grew thin on my tongue, my eyes began to well with tears. I can hardly explain it. The words took a long time to flow, much more slowly than the tears streaming down my face. In that moment, I could feel the ice melting all over the world. It was trickling down my throat, a reflection of the trickling Mulam below. It grew warmer as it reached the area of my chest, and my heart was pounding. I could feel the depths of time and earth becoming a part of my body. It was a communion of the earth, body, and blood as one in the melting ice. This became a moment of reverie and quiet in the midst of chaos for me. It was a numinous, holy moment of communion with the earth, which demanded an icy environment of stillness and slowness, one that required vast expanses of space on which to reflect and witness. These are all things that the constant clatter and striving of the modern world find difficult. Sadly, this is precisely what we need in order to begin to heal, to live into the feelings that such a crisis requires. Here, I want to bring in one of Carl Jung's big dreams, a dream that stuck with him and influenced the course of his life. It is reported in his posthumously published Red Book. In my homeland, I found that in the middle of summer, a terrible cold had fallen from space, which had turned every living thing into ice. There stood a leaf-bearing but fruitless tree whose leaves had turned into sweet grapes full of healing juice through the working of the frost. I picked some grapes and gave them to a great waiting throng. Here we see an example of the healing power of ice for the collective. Most of us know that ice is a great pain reliever. It helps reduce swelling in the case of bodily injury. Frost and ice can be destructive, but they can also provide medicine. In Jung's dream, the leaves are transformed into grapes with a touch of frost and imbued with healing qualities. From grapes come wine. In the religious mass or communion, the wine is the blood. The blood is the sacrifice. The blood is also the blood of the ice that I tasted, the sacrament I participated in on that glacier hike. It is the healing blood of the ice, reborn as balm and rebirth, uniting the material and the ephemeral, reminding us all that we are connected and that we need community with others to begin to tackle the crisis in our world. In her book on ambiguous loss, therapist Pauline Boss directs that this is one of the main components needed to live with grief of this type. Ambiguous loss, she states, is an unclear loss that defies closure. This means that an individual was either lost in body and is still psychologically present, as in cases of the missing due to war, kidnapping, etc. Or in the reverse, the body of the individual remains, but much of what that individual once was has been lost, as in the case of comas, addiction, Alzheimer's, stroke, etc. Either way, there is a deep tension that must be held. In our changing world, there are many parts of the planet feeling concrete forms of loss due to environmental upheaval. However, many, especially those in positions of power and privilege, have not had that concrete moment. The environmental crisis is still an abstract concept. We may hear stories on the news or notice changes in weather patterns, but the change is not so great as to threaten our whole way of life yet. We see this loss from afar. It's abstract or completely unconscious. The loss is ambiguous. We are ambiguous. For me, the environmental crisis became uniquely personal a few years ago when my mother fell into a coma. She's doing very well now, but at the time it was a terrible period of ambiguous loss. I was not familiar with this terminology at the time, but as days turned into weeks of waiting, I had to learn to live in the not knowing. I had to let go of the possibilities of the past and just be what the future would hold. Day after day, the glacier in my heart and mind ground me down, like a mill refining me, leaving only the white powder of glacial flour in its wake. The more I sat with the ice in this paradoxical waiting, the waiting I learned while at my mother's bedside, the more I saw our world suffering from the same ambiguous loss. The key is to keep on living, to find community, to find a purpose and find healing, even in the deepest wound. This waiting was a milling process. It refines. As I sat with this image of the mill, suddenly, the handless maiden, a miller's daughter, appeared. As I thought about it more and more, this tale and the archetypal image of the maiden seemed very fitting for our world today. I will have to mill this story down for time, but as the tale goes, there was a miller who made a deal with the devil. In exchange for riches, he would give him whatever stood behind his mill. Thinking the bargain was for the old apple tree, the miller returns home and realizes that his daughter had been behind the mill sweeping when the bargain was struck. After 3 years, the devil returns to claim his bride. For 2 days in a row, he returns to claim her, but each time her weeping has washed her hands clean, too clean for the devil to take. So the devil requests that her father chop off her hands so that she cannot cry into them and make herself clean, and the father complies. The 3rd day, the devil comes again, but as before, what's left of her arms are washed clean from her tears, so the devil cannot have her. After this, she leaves home and wanders, relying on the kindness of strangers and nature to provide. In the course of her wandering, she meets and falls in love with the king. They marry and have a child. Then, through a series of deceptions by the devil, the now princess is thrown out of the castle with her baby strapped to her chest. She heads back into the forest of the world. One day, near a river, the baby falls in. She cries out for help, but no one comes. So eventually, she plunges her arms in. When she pulls them out, with the baby in tow, she finds that her hands have been restored to flesh and blood. This is a crude and quick version of a greatly nuanced tale, but I hope you will begin to see through it with a symbolic eye, as a tale of ice, the world, and ambiguous loss. The miller's daughter in her white dress, with the innocence of the just fallen snow, is when we can ignore the evils of the world, dismiss the crises we face. Next, reality begins to creep in. The devil approaches. There is symbolic death and loss in the loss of the hands. Not only does she lose her hands, but there is a threat that all of her will be lost, taken by the devil. Here, she is in a moment of ambiguous loss, that all of her will be lost from a bargain badly struck. She does not know if her life will continue forward, but even if it does, she is forever changed. In our world today, this is the capitalistic bargain, which has landed us in the climate crisis, but also the one that has privileged the patriarchal colonial ways. In this bargain, the feminine, imaginal, embodied matter of the world and the self is sacrificed for the currencies of our time, instant gratification and monetary compensation. No matter what is lost, just like the miller's daughter, daughter of the glacier, we must continue forward in our new form. The slow creeping of the glacial mill teaches us this quality. Once we slow down and give the grieving process the time and weight it needs, we can begin to imagine a world anew. Only by relying on the power of our emotions, our tears, can we be saved from inevitable darkness. All the stones and obstacles in our path are ground down to bright white glacial flour. From this, we create ourselves and our world anew. The imaginal can be made material, the soft, almost liquid flour given form in the newly baked bread of the body. This is the second half of our Eucharist, giving form to the formless, voice to the voiceless. After being ground down, the miller's daughter remakes herself with hands of living flesh once she trusts in her own strength to save her future in the form of her child. This is such a beautiful metaphor for what is needed in our current climate crisis. Will we too be reborn as a society through the love of the next generation and the potential of an earth renewed? Will we find the courage to plunge our imperfect selves into the depths to redeem our future, be reborn to a new way forward. By pulling this newborn energy out of the water, the miller's daughter lives into her nurturing mother aspect. She becomes an archetype of birth and renewal, of nurturer and protector. This renewal comes from the waters. This water is the tears which the world must shed as one, united in grief, honoring a shared loss. This flowing water of emotions can set us free to discover who we really are and how we can move forward in these uncertain times. These waters must begin to flow in us, in the hopes that they cease to flow in excess from the Arctic ice. As we melt the ice in our hearts, we can envision a new hope for the world. On this new path, we have to die to the ways that no longer serve. This figure to the rebirth of a new era. As we begin to acknowledge the death of the world as we know it, we have to see through the melting ice, the rising seas, and instead of dividing ourselves from the earth, we need to know that we too are of the earth. The earth is not without soul any more than we are. We are not either or, we are both and. From this place, we take the holy wafer on our tongue. We sip the healing fruit of the ice, and we are refreshed to start on the journey anew. It's my pleasure to introduce Tim Ford. Tim has been a palliative and hospice chaplain for many years and teaches spirituality and medicine at VCU's School of Medicine. Tim is a practicing Buddhist and has joined FFCH as our convener for engaged spirituality.
Thank you, Sarah. I don't know about you all, but for someone who's just taken a ride through our collective consciousness and then our collective unconsciousness, I'm feeling remarkably grounded. It's really been a powerful ride. So I'm going to continue with this water metaphor a little bit here. And I really want to talk a little bit about what this looks like when we put it into practice. So if we talk about taking this deep understanding of grief and our understanding of our collective Gaia participation that we're doing, what does it look like when we do it? And as usual for me, I'd like to just skip to the good parts. So I'm going to tell a little story that I got from a patient of mine many, many years ago. This was in the previous century when I was a young chaplain. And I was working with a guy who was in our prison unit at the hospital. In fact, he was incarcerated for life. And he was coming in for a surgery on his neck. He had a benign tumor. It wasn't a deadly thing, but it was about the size of a large pancake on his neck. And in order to get it off, it was so big, they had to do it in pieces. And they would take it into a very complicated surgery of stripping it off his neck and then peeling off some skin from his thigh and grafting that onto his neck. And it took 3 surgeries to do this. After each surgery, he had to hold his head perfectly immobile, his neck perfectly immobile for the skin to take. And in order to do that, they had put a frame on his shoulders that screwed into the top of his head, literally screwed into his skull, holding his neck in perfect stillness. And all that time from each surgery, he wasn't allowed to eat or drink because the swallowing motion would be too much motion on his neck. And so they had him on a tube for anywhere from 7 to 10 days after each of these 3 surgeries where he couldn't eat or drink. And we had a lot of conversations, but often they were about what he wished he could eat right now when he was going many days without being able to eat. Because even though his body was getting the nutrition it needed, there's still that just desire to have things in your mouth. And he talked about cheeseburgers and things that he would rather have. And I remember distinctly one night, it was a weekend, I remember. It was my last visit of the night. It was about 10 o'clock at night. And we talked about cheeseburgers and things he wanted to eat. And at the end, he said, I want you to go home tonight and pour yourself a tall glass of cold water. And I want you to enjoy that because I can't. And I did. I made it home about 11 o'clock that night, poured myself a tall glass of cold water, sitting there in my little kitchen. And I did nothing but sit and drink that glass of water. And as I drank it, I thought about him, and I thought about how wonderful it is that I could swallow, that I could enjoy this glass of water, and what an amazing thing a glass of water really is. To this day, it's the best glass of water I've ever had in my life. And I went back days later and I thanked him for that. And I thought it was an incredible gift for a man in his situation to give to me. And he gave me a little sermon, if you will, that I've remembered all these years. He said, I can wake up in the morning and I can see that I have my head bolted into a frame on my neck. I can't lay down. I can't swallow. I can't eat. I can't leave this room. There's an armed guard outside my door. I'm going to spend the rest of my life in prison. And his list went on for a while. And then he said, I can see all of this as the wrath of a God who hates me for the things I've done wrong. Or I can wake up in the morning and I can see that I have a soft pillow under my back, that I have shelter, that I have all the nutrition I need, that I have a team of scientists and doctors who are performing modern miracles of medicine on me in order to save my life. I can see that there are people who respect me. There are even people who love me in this world who know what I've done. And I can see all of that as a bountiful gift from the universe out of love. He said the difference between those two things has nothing to do with the world or what life is bringing me. Doesn't have anything to do with God, he said. It has to do with me. I can take one or the other. Now, I would say that would be lovely if we could live like that all the time, to make that transition from despair and loss into deep, abiding gratitude. I have tried over the years to skip to that part, right? To let's skip all the loss and grieving part and get straight to the glass of water and how grateful we are for what we've got. And I know you can't normally skip that. And that process of getting from one to the other, that transformation, that transition, that may not be what we always think of as grief, but I would argue it is. It's the processing of loss. You know, we usually use this term grief to mean the end of life, the end of our body, for the death of our loved ones, for the death of those that are dearest to us. And it invokes, when we say the word, this remembered sorrow of parting and loss. I know in this last year, especially, we've all had a lot to grieve. And I think you can feel with me sort of the larger sense of the world when you think of it. I mean, the word grief, when you think of it that way, it's an emotional processing of transitions in our lives. And as nature teaches us on a regular basis, there really is no transition without loss. There's no spring without winter. There's no fertilizer without fundament, if you will, right? In every moment of growth, there is something to grieve, something that's gone before to make room for this new life, this new eternally renewing wonder that surrounds us every moment, the soft pillows, the glass of water. And this process of moving from loss to renewal, the grief process, it requires a sense of intimacy, a sense of intensity that you have to participate in. And at times it's very frightful. It requires us to stop our constant striving and moving around and actually sit down and drink that whole glass of water and do nothing else. I think part of the mechanics of this transition are an act of surrendering the comfort of what was known for the uncertainty of the unknown. And you can see this if you've ever been around toddlers, right? They come at the world stoked, just fired to the gills, ready to do what they're going to do that day. They have no idea what they're going to do that day. I remember when my children were that young, they'd just come at the world just ready to go. They had no idea. But they trusted their parents, they trusted the world to be a steady place, to be comforting. And as adults, and especially in this last year, we've had to abandon some of this certainty in the concrete comforts of our world, that the world and the earth will always be there, will always be safe and comfortable, is something that we often have to abandon. When you even go to the grocery store and have to think about increased risk of disease, you know, this normalcy of our mundane tasks, that's not something we can do right now. But I would argue that when you don't have to abandon trust when you abandon that certainty. And what I mean by that is, like, even though I can't be certain that the water that I'm seeing in a river is always the same water, or even the banks are the same over the years, I know that that river is still a river, right? The world changes constantly. Like Jan said, we are nodes of change participating in this consciousness, but the earth remains. And in the same way, I can love my kids in every new moment, every new iteration, every time they come at me, even though they've changed immensely over the past year, sometimes over the past month. I can enjoy a glass of water as if it were my last, or as if I could never drink again. I can enjoy how wonderful it is to do that when I acknowledge that those who go without one are also part of my tribe, and there too go I. I mean, it's a hard way to put it, but there will come a time in all of our lives when we won't be able to drink a glass of water. And so the task of grief is acknowledging that things have changed, are changing, will always change, but it allows us to access that gratitude for that which is always in front of us, the soft pillows. It's holding ourselves open to just how fragile and how much we've lost in this world in order to acknowledge with deepest gratitude, with intimate, felt gratitude, just how precious our planet really is. So if you'll join me for a second, I want to really invite you to participate in this, not just listen to me talk about it. You can do it from Sarah's communion with that ancient ice, right? I'm thinking of how many eons we have had to go through as a species, as a people, to get to where we are right now. That we can sit and have this conversation over Zoom on these computers when we are 150,000 years away from being monkeys. That's pretty impressive. All of the genetics and all that have had to go through to come to where we are to this moment to be able to do this. But more than that, where I really feel it is that we have had a life that allows us the freedom to sit and talk for a few hours about how much we love this earth, and to receive the wisdom of people that are thinking about that and share this moment together. That's the glass of water to me. To be able to just sit and enjoy that and appreciate that isn't just an exercise of our minds. It's not just an exercise that we can think about. It's something we can do. So take a moment just for a second and think about all that has come to get you here, to listen to this, to be together as we share all this together, and think about what that means can come in the earth, in the world that we are creating together, in the world to come. And take a moment of just drinking the glass of water. The way I'd invite you to that is through your breath, because I think that's easier than asking all of you to go get a glass of water right now. So just take a deep breath with me and receive that we can breathe. That we have oxygen that was created for us by the living lungs of our planet, all the plants and all the things that had to go into that. that we have the physiology, that we have the legacy, that we have the emotional fortitude to be able to hear and do this. And that we have each other, that we are joined together in our purpose of loving this earth, of seeking out ways to love it more, that we are connected as part of this earth. As Jan said, we are participating in the consciousness of this earth just by being. That gratitude is a known physiological effect, right? And I would argue you can't access it without acknowledging the loss. So I also want to take a moment to acknowledge all that we have lost in this last year, all that has cut us away from people. And knowing that that's part of the growth that the earth has planned. That is the winter to our spring. And that is what has been cleared so that we can come forward in a new way. Thank you for joining me with that. I know that's always a little much to ask over Zoom, so I appreciate you kind of being there with it. And then it's my privilege, I get to finish and introduce Karen Gill. I'm very excited to introduce Karen Gill, who's been known to me for a long time in the practice that she's done in the community. She's a licensed clinical social worker who works in private practice. She has a focus on grief and trauma, and she's been involved with Mothers Out Front, which is a national climate action group, for about 4 years. So please welcome with me, Karen Gill.
Hi, I'm Karen Gill, and my presentation today is based on Rumi, the Rumi poem, and I'll just share that with you now. Today, like every other day, we wake up empty and frightened. Do not open the door to the study and begin reading. Take down the dulcimer. Let the beauty we love be what we do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground. This will be the outline of my conversation with you all today. And I want to just start with this idea of waking up empty and frightened. And of all of the ways that we talk about grief, this strikes at the very heart. Miriam Greenspan, in her book, Healing Through the Dark Emotions, reminds us that when we experience grief, the self we have always known is all at once shattered. And there's no way that we can continue to live as we have always been when a deep grief has changed our lives. Starting to reflect on this presentation, I was working on it on the most incredibly delicious spring day. The world was as beautiful and as everything that I had come to expect the world would be in the spring. And so it was hard to think about, what is this that I am grieving? And then I remembered that during the winter time, there was an ice storm, and in front of my house, there is a magnolia tree, and it is tall and beautiful. And in that ice storm, it lost so many branches, and I'm looking at it now. And just that sense of the world changing, and you know, when we think about moving into the summertime with its more extreme heat, with more tornadic activity in Virginia than like in my grandmother's time, there were no tornadoes to speak of. And our earth is changing, and it's easy to like shift our focus away from it. But in those moments, there is this tension and this anxiety. Sarah put it so brilliantly in her conversation about ambiguous loss. Another way that we can be thinking about this is kind of an anticipatory grief, that we know something is shifting and changing, and it might not impact us right now. It might not impact us directly, but we know in our bodies that things are shifting and different. But spring still comes and winter still comes. And so we notice that we have this anticipation of grief. And surely there are some of us that are experiencing traumatic grief, the grief that comes when we lose homes and communities and loved ones to wildfires and hurricanes. Francis Weller is the author of The Wild Edge of Sorrow, and his work touched me more than anything that I have ever read. And everything that I wanted to say, he kind of said with me and for me. But these are his words. The greater part of the soul lies outside the body. As Jung noted, we live in psyche. Psyche does not live in us. We are enveloped in a field of consciousness. Everything possesses soul. Jan. What if it is the grief of the forest registering in our bodies and psyches, the sorrow of the redwoods, voles, sorrel, ferns, owls, and deer, all those who lost their homes and lives as a result of plundering living things? What if we are not separate from the world at all? It is our spiritual responsibility to acknowledge these losses. And when we do, the result can sometimes be an anxiety and an emptiness and fear. And Rumi says to us, do not open the door to the study and begin reading. We need to recognize that that is part of our protective system. When we intellectualize and avoid and distract, it's important to notice that that is how we as humans work. When things feel so big and so overwhelming, we don't know what to do with it, so we're inclined to turn away. But this is not where healing occurs. Anne Lamott reminds us that the rational mind doesn't nourish you. You assume that it gives you truth because the rational mind is the golden calf that this culture worships. But this is not true. And so we can notice how important and helpful our protective system is. And goodness, there are so many ways of distraction in our world, right? There's intellectualizing, distraction, there's television and cell phones, and every way that possible to distract ourselves from the truth of it. So we can't shame ourselves for noticing how our protective system works. But we invite a deeper connection to the process of loving and grieving. So we take down the dulcimer. We breathe. Breath connects us to our animal bodies within the present moment. It is part of our survival mechanism that allows us to be in this world, and also it is the one part of our survival mechanism that we have a lot of control over and we can really notice. We take in the present moment, the present awareness, with an open heart, with curiosity, and hopefully with compassion. So when we can turn from our distracted behavior and our intellectualizing to our more compassionate, loving heart, that's where we can find our relationship with Earth as a way of healing our grief and being with Earth in her grief. Etymologically, breath connects us to spirit, inspiration, breath of life, wind, and conspire, to breathe together. This is the seat of being with and turning toward and noticing all there is to fully appreciate, savor, and love what is being lost and what we can conspire to save. Let the beauty we love be what we do. In Francis Weller's book, he writes, to the Navajo, healing is a ritual of restoring balance, a return to beauty. Beauty is the central organizing principle in their culture, not economics, not technology, not politics. And it is through beauty that all relationships are maintained. And it is when beauty is lost or forgotten that someone gets ill. When we come into community, the emptiness and the fear can be shared and normalized and held with compassion. We find beauty in community of common goals, like this community present now, and all those that will engage in this presentation at a future time. All of our voices, our spirit, our gifts, all are needed. None of us alone are enough. All of us speaking in love and healing energy absolutely have the capacity to move the needle. If not to save our species, at least to save the waters, the wilderness, the air, for those that come after. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground. One of the things that I find as a way of returning to breath and community and love is through music. It connects us to memory and emotion. And even neuroscience doesn't understand how somebody with Alzheimer's, who cannot hardly put words together and remember their loved ones' names, can find music, can be able to sing. I had the most amazing experience when I was working in a nursing home. A completely mute woman who had not been able to speak in all the time I worked. When I started leading her and others in a song, like I think it was Jesus Loves Me or something, and she was singing, and it was the most amazing thing I had ever experienced, and I will never forget that moment. So I'm going to lead a chant, and this is a chant that comes from the work of John Philip Newell. He is a leader in Celtic spirituality, and I invite you to sing with me, or if that doesn't feel comfortable, you can say the words or reflect on the words. And as you do so, I invite you to just notice where this sentiment is directed toward. Is it your wise, compassionate self? Is it your higher power or spirit? Or to Earth herself? So the words are, let me hear. Let me hear what you will say when I turn to you in my heart. Let me hear what you will say when I turn to you in my heart. Let me hear what you will say when I turn to you in my heart. Let me hear what you will say when I turn to you in my heart. Thank you for listening. I now have the pleasure of introducing Faith. She is a healer and an energy worker and a master hypnotherapist specializing in spiritual regression. She is a lover of beauty and nature and will lead us in a healing meditation.
Thank you, Karen. I'll begin to ask everybody to close their eyes, please. And if you would, place your hands, both of your hands, over your precious heart. And as you close your eyes, which is an invitation to begin to sink deeply into the experience that you're having right now, I'd like to take a minute to offer a pause to integrate the beautiful sharings that we just received. That was a lot. Please allow your heart to fill with a full moment of cherishing everything you're experiencing right now. Please honor the breadth of what you're experiencing, what you're feeling, as it moves directly into your beautiful heart. We have time to feel our feelings. And we have time to begin to remember our true nature as a human being. I see each human taking breath on earth as being, by our very nature, an earth healer already. I would call it our birthright. And a remembrance of that role might begin by each of us finding a particular spot on this beautiful earth, a place where we feel drawn to in this moment. It could be a particular continent. Trust where you're being guided to find yourself. Maybe it's a desert. Maybe it's inside a deep cavern within the earth. Maybe it's a forest or a mountaintop or near water. Maybe it's in the tundra. Maybe it's on a glacier. Maybe it's all those places at once. And wherever you find yourself, take time to notice, what time of year is it? What is the season of this experience? Is it day or is it night? Just take in your surroundings. As fully as you will let yourself. Begin to notice your relationship with this place. Does it feel familiar and comfortable? Or is it more that new, unsure feeling? Just let those feelings settle in. And gradually, you begin to realize that you hear sound, the sound of other humans. And you begin to follow the sound. As you're being drawn toward a group of humans, of people who are actively paying homage to Mother Earth. They are honoring their relationship, and they're seeking to deepen their relationship to her. They may be dancing and singing or drumming. They may have lit a beautiful fire. Or maybe they're silent together in prayer, or quietly gazing up at the beautiful sky above. Maybe these seem like scenes from long ago, from a time when most humans felt no separation from Earth and themselves. It had never occurred to them to feel separate. A time when one season flowed into the next, and the natural cycles were held sacred and of value to an infinite, ever unfolding universal process. As you take your own sweet, soft, gentle time observing this group, if you're ready, if you feel comfort, see if you can find a way to step in fully into this scene. So to become a participant rather than an observer. Maybe even there's a member of this group who will help you feel welcome and show you their ways. Maybe this is so easy for you. It's like putting on a favorite coat that you've had as long as you can remember. Or maybe it's brand new and a little scary. Please understand you're free to ask any questions of any of the humans in this group. Feel free to ask them to show you anything you're curious about. And as you blend with this remembrance, understand you are beginning to remember who you really are as a child of Earth. How naturally it is for you to step back into your place as an Earth healer. And as you consciously reclaim this role for yourself, let it fill in those pockets of grief and yearning. And you might want to begin to invite members of your family to join you. Special friends, all of your friends. Your neighbors, your community. All humans, all the kingdoms. And the love that exists throughout the universe pours in to bless this holy remembrance so that the grief and the pain and the suffering remembers that snuggled next to it is a joy and a celebration of the heart. Side by side, hand in hand we go. Forward together. And so it is. Thank you so much for your heart, for your remembrance, for your tears, and for your joy. And so our beautiful founder, FFCH founder and visionary Susanna, has a few words to say.
Thank you, Faith. That was beautiful and as always. And I want to thank all of the presenters today, and you all just remind me all the time about how special this community is, how grateful I am to be immersed among so much wisdom and beauty of spirit and generosity of heart and mind. And today's event, I think, was just an exemplary example of what this community brings to our care for Earth and each other, and bringing forth our best and highest self. So thank you, team, for really an event that even exceeded my very high expectations. We started with such a lovely introduction with Jan about on the scientific end of the spectra, learning about our own and shared consciousness and communication with Earth. And then Tim led us through a story about loss and grief and how that opens us up to the sense of how precious even the smallest things are and a pathway to joy. And Karen, Sarah talked about our unconscious mourning of ambiguous loss and the beautiful metaphors of the glaciers as being so alive and integrated with our own hearts and minds. Karen talked about our anticipatory loss and returning to our breath and opening our hearts in community, and using music to kiss the ground. And thank you, Faith, for that journey to reuniting with a lost part of ourselves and our relationship to our beautiful earth. So I also really appreciate the community who is present today, and just invite you, if you have any thoughts or comments, to go ahead and put them into the chat right now. The team is standing by to respond. And I just wanted to, if you're not already aware of it, to just tell you about what we're doing in Foundation, and to invite you to continue to explore this, I think, beautiful interface that I just find so delicious, that spans from scientific through spiritual and everything in between, for not only the benefit of Earth, but benefit of ourselves, benefit of our families and communities. We have our monthly programming. We have meditations the first 4 Mondays of the month. We have discussions, and we have our speaker series, which will continue next month with a speaker from the Sierra Club. And we are launching our brand new website, which I think we will go up tomorrow on Earth Day, perfect timing. And from there, you can also find our links to social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And you can also join us on our relationship skill educational platform, and where we explore in depth how to create healthy and rewarding relationship skills with ourselves, each other, including our families and communities, and with Earth and the loving force that connects us. And we have 2 levels right now. The introductory level is a beautiful, self-paced and interactive module that we're offering on a sliding scale tuition to the world, because this is just information we feel everyone should have access to. And we're also offering a deeper dive for smaller groups who want to participate in a Zoom or eventually live facilitated sessions. This is an example of, well, this is a screenshot of the modules we have available right now at that introductory level, and we're going to just keep growing them. Again, they're all about building skills in our relationship with self, other, Earth, and the loving force that connects us. And so we hope to bring this learning and education not only to ourselves, but to everyone everywhere. So I hope you will continue to join us as we learn and grow together and discover and explore through social media, our programs, and or in partnership with other organizations. If you're part of an organization that would resonate with working with us, or if you're an educator yourself and you're passionate about getting your content out to a larger audience, we'd love for you to contact us and see if we could work together. And of course, we also appreciate donations. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, and we feel like we are bringing valuable education, discussion, knowledge, and healing to the world. So let me pull up my chat again. I don't see too many questions in the chat that are unanswered. So I will just, again, express my deep gratitude to the presenters and all the participants, and hope to see you in future events. or offline somewhere. And before I close, I just want to ask the Earth Day team if they would stay on for a few minutes. And otherwise, I will just wish you healing in our journey as we go forth together through the many changes that our lives will face us, will present to us, and the inevitable grief and loss. And may we find that moment of grace and gratitude for the many blessings that we still have. Thank you, and have a beautiful day.